She runs one of the most dangerous criminal empires in all of Korea. Her enemies disappear without a trace. Her allies bow when she enters a room, and yet, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Kang Seo-jin, the woman they call the Ice Queen, stood at a grocery checkout counter with no wallet, no bodyguards, and nowhere to hide while a cashier screamed at her like she was garbage. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Until a young black woman with $3 and tired eyes stepped forward and quietly changed everything. If you've never seen power brought to its knees by simple human kindness, stay right here. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday, the kind of rain that turned Seoul's back alleys into rivers and made even the toughest men walk a little faster, shoulders hunched, eyes on the ground. It was the kind of rain that had no patience for anyone. Kang Seo-jin stepped off a side street and into the fluorescent glare of a small neighborhood market, a cramped, cluttered place wedged between a dry cleaner and a shuttered phone repair shop in the Mapo district. The store smelled like wet cardboard and fermented radish, and the overhead lights buzzed with the kind of flicker that gave people headaches. She had chosen it for exactly those reasons. No one who mattered would be caught dead inside a place like this. She wore a plain charcoal coat 2 sizes too large, a scarf pulled up past her jaw, and reading glasses she did not need. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned back without care. She had done this before, dressed down, slipped out of the tower in Gangnam where her operations were headquartered, walked into ordinary neighborhoods just to remember what the world looked like without bodyguards and black SUVs. It was the only peace she allowed herself. 2 hours, maybe 3, in a life that had not known quiet in a very long time. She was 53 years old, and she was tired in a way that sleep had stopped fixing years ago. She moved through the narrow aisles slowly, touching nothing. A bag of chestnuts, a jar of pickled plum, a rack of dried seaweed wrapped in red string. She was not shopping with intention. She was drifting, which was something she could never do anywhere else. She let herself drift for 11 minutes. She counted them. At the bread aisle, she stopped. There was a single loaf of white sandwich bread left on the shelf, slightly crushed on one end, its plastic wrapper spotted with condensation. It cost 2,800 to 1, less than $3 American. She picked it up without thinking, tucked it under her arm, and walked to the checkout counter at the front. The cashier was a young man, maybe 22, with an underfed face and the posture of someone who had been told his whole life that his job was beneath him and had decided to believe it. He was on his phone when she approached. He did not look up until she set the bread on the counter. He scanned it, named the price. She reached into her coat pocket. Nothing. She reached into the other pocket. Her hand found a folded tissue, a single subway card, and nothing else. Her wallet was not there. She stood very still for a moment and understood, with the particular clarity that only comes from catastrophic embarrassment, that she had left it in the interior of the decoy vehicle she'd stepped out of 4 blocks away. The bodyguard had her personal bag. She had nothing. 4 seconds, the cashier said, finally looking at her. Not kindly. I seem to have left my... Lady. He set his phone down. His voice carried easily through the small store. Do you have the money or not? I can call someone to bring... There are people waiting. There were 2 people behind her. Neither was in a hurry. Neither said anything. If you don't have the money, step aside. Seo-jin felt something tighten in her jaw. She had sat across the table from men who ran the largest trafficking networks on the peninsula. She had signed orders that ended careers, and in her darker years she did not revisit unless she had to, she had signed orders that ended other things. She was not a woman who was rattled. But there was something specific about being publicly humiliated in a place where you have no armor that is different from every other kind of threat. It was smaller. It was personal. It found the spaces that power couldn't fill. I'm trying to explain the situation, she said, keeping her voice flat. Ma'am, I don't need an explanation. I need 2,801 or I need you to put the bread back and move. He picked his phone back up. You're holding up the line. The 2 people behind her stared at the floor. A woman near the refrigerated section glanced over and then away. Nobody moved. Nobody offered a word. Seojin's hand found the counter and gripped the edge of it. Not from distress. To stop herself from doing something that would make the news by morning. She was thinking through her options. Retrieve the bread, leave, have Min-jae deal with this miserable little store by the end of the week, when she heard a voice behind her. "I've got it." The voice was low, accented, unhurried. Not performing, not announcing anything, just stating a fact. Seojin turned. The young woman who had spoken was standing second in line, holding a small basket with a bottle of cooking oil and a packet of instant ramen. She was black, mid-20s, the kind of tired that had settled into the bones rather than just the face. Her jacket was clean but worn at the elbows. Her hair was pulled back under a knit cap. She was already moving forward, unzipping a small purse as she stepped to the counter, and she set 3 coins and 2 crumpled notes on the counter without ceremony. The cashier looked at the money, looked at her, looked back at the money. He counted it, processed the transaction, handed a receipt to no one in particular, and turned his eyes back to his phone. The young woman handed the bread to Seojin. That was it. No speech, no extended eye contact. She was already turning back to her basket. Seojin said, "You didn't have to do that." The young woman looked at her then, and there was something in her face that was not pity, which is what Seojin had braced for. It was something simpler than that, practical, certain. "Nobody deserves to be treated like they are worthless," she said. Then she turned back to the counter and started unloading her basket. Seojin stood with the bread in her hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Rain hit the window in long diagonal lines. She left the store. She walked 4 blocks in the rain. She found the black car parked where she'd left it, climbed in, and told Min-jae to drive without specifying a direction. She held the bread the entire way back to Gangnam. Momtemt. Park Min-jae had worked for Seojin for 9 years, long enough to know when not to ask questions and when he had no choice but to. He was 41, broad through the shoulders, with a nose that had been broken twice and never quite set right. He was not a man of sentiment, but he was a man of precision, and he had learned that Seojin's moods were a kind of weather. Not mysterious, simply worth reading carefully. When she came back from her walks, she was usually quieter than when she left. That Tuesday, she was something else, not quiet exactly. Somewhere beneath the surface of her stillness, there was something moving that he couldn't name. She sat at the long table in the operations room on the 34th floor and did not open a single file for 40 minutes. She just looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Rain dragged long gray streaks down Seoul's skyline. Across the Han River, towers blinked in the low light. Then she said, "There was a girl." Min-jae waited. Young, maybe 24, 25. She was working at the market on Mapo Daero. I don't know if it was her job or she was shopping. Black woman, American accent, I think. She paid for something of mine. A pause. She had almost nothing. I could see it, and she still paid. Min-jae said, "Do you want me to find her?" "I want to know who she is first, that's all." It took him less than 6 hours. The market had 1 working security camera, angled poorly but functional. The timestamp matched. Min-jae's man pulled the footage, ran the face through 3 separate databases, cross-referenced employment records against the visa registry, and had a file on Amara Williams by 10 o'clock that night. Min-jae laid it on the table in front of Seojin. She read it without speaking. Amara Adayez Williams, 26 years old, born in Chicago, Illinois, resident in Seoul for 14 months on a working visa, employed as a contract cleaning associate at Hansung Commercial Tower in Yeongdong-po, and simultaneously as a late-shift floor technician at Seocho Medical Complex. 2 jobs, 6 days a week. Combined income, just under $2 million, 1 per month. Her mother, Grace Williams, was listed as a medical dependent. Stage 2 kidney disease. Treatment costs were being partially covered by insurance, but the gap was significant. Amara was supplementing the payments herself. There was a younger brother still in Chicago, 18 years old, in his first semester at a community college. The tuition payments were also coming from Amara. She was sending money home while barely covering rent in Seoul. The numbers didn't work, and she was making them work anyway, through volume of labor and the complete elimination of anything that cost money beyond necessity. Seo-jin sat with the file for a long time. She had built an empire on the premise that no one gives freely, that generosity is always a transaction in disguise, that the hand extended in help is also reaching for something: reputation, leverage, debt. She had learned this in her 20s when the people she trusted most had peeled away one by one, and she had built Baekhwa on that lesson as if it were bedrock. She looked at the receipt in the file. Min Jae had retrieved the store's records. The purchase, 2,801, 2 crumpled notes and 3 coins. What was left in Amara's wallet after that? 0. She had spent everything she had. She did not do it to impress anyone. There was no one there who could do anything for her. She gave because she gave, and then she turned back to her ramen noodles and her cooking oil, and she went home. Seo-jin set the file down. "Where is she tonight?" she asked. "Seocho Medical Complex," Min Jae said. "Late shift. Ends at 2 a.m. Seo-jin checked the clock on the wall. It was 11:43. "Have a car outside when she gets off," she said. "Not for anything, just to see where she goes." Min Jae nodded and reached for his phone. "Min Jae?" Seo-jin said. He stopped. "Standard plates. Nothing that looks like us." He understood. She didn't want to frighten the girl, not yet, maybe not at all. What he reported back the following morning was this. Amara Williams finished her shift at 2:14 a.m. She took the subway, not a cab, the subway, transferring twice in an empty station at that hour, which Min Jae's man noted was something he personally would not want to do at 2 in the morning, but she did it without apparent concern. She stopped at a 24-hour convenience store and bought a single triangle kimbap and a bottle of barley tea. She ate it standing up outside the store in the cold. Then she walked 12 minutes to a residential building in Guro and went inside. The apartment was registered to her, 4th floor, no elevator. She had been on her feet since 6 the previous morning, 20-plus hours, and she stood in the cold eating triangle kimbap at 2:30 a.m., like it was just what needed to happen. Seo-jin listened to the report. She did not comment. She asked Min Jae to get her car ready at 10. She went herself. No entourage. Just Min Jae driving, one other man in the passenger seat, and Seo-jin in the back in the same plain charcoal coat. They parked across the street from the Guro building, and she watched the entrance for a while. Then she told Min Jae to wait, got out, and crossed the street. She found the buzzer panel and pressed the 4th floor. After a long moment, "Yes?" "I was at the market yesterday," Seo-jin said. "You bought something for me. I owe you." Silence. The length of it meant the girl was trying to decide if this was dangerous. "I don't need anything," the voice came back. "I know," Seo-jin said. "That's why I'm here." Another silence, different from the first. Then the door buzzed open. The apartment was small in the way that told an accurate story. Not sparse because someone had chosen minimalism, but sparse because there was only enough money for what was necessary. A folding table, 2 chairs, a small television angled toward a sleeping mat rolled in the corner. In the narrow kitchen, dishes drying on a rack. A medication schedule taped to the refrigerator door. Amara opened the door wearing a sweatshirt with a university logo that had been washed enough times to lose its color. Her eyes moved from Seo-jin to the stairwell behind her and back again. She was assessing, smart enough to assess. "You came alone?" Amara said. Seo-jin said, "Yes," which was close enough to true. They stood in the doorway for a moment, then Amara stepped back and let her in. Seo-jin had not meant to stay long. She had come without a plan, which was unlike her, and she had come without an agenda, which was more unlike her still. She told herself she only wanted to see. She saw. A framed photo above the folding table. A woman in her 50s in a hospital bed, smiling with the particular effort of someone who has decided to smile on behalf of someone else. The mother. Beside it, a printout of a wire transfer receipt, most recent transaction, Chicago bound. The amount was not large. The date was 3 days ago, which meant she had sent it around the same time she had exactly $3 to her name. Seo-jin stood in front of those two things for a moment longer than she intended. Amara was watching her from the kitchen, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, the way someone stands when they want you to get to the point. "What do you want?" Amara asked. Seo-jin turned from the photo. "I want to know why you did it." "Bought the bread?" "Yes." Amara looked at her like the question itself was slightly baffling. "Because you needed it," she said. "That's it. There's no other reason." "Most people didn't move," Seo-jin said. "I know." There was no heat in it, just observation. "People don't like to get involved." "But you did." "I did." Seo-jin was quiet for a moment. Then she took off her reading glasses and put them in her pocket, and some shift happened in her posture. Slight, but Amara saw it, because Amara was a woman who had learned to watch people carefully, out of necessity. "My name is Kang Seo-jin," she said. "You may have heard of Baekwa." The silence that followed was not short. Amara's arms, still crossed, tightened slightly against her ribs. Her eyes did not go wide the way untrained people's eyes did. But the calculation behind them changed. Seo-jin could see it happening. "The holding company," Amara said slowly. "Among other things," Seo-jin said. Amara stared at her. "You're the head of Baekwa Syndicate." Seo-jin said nothing, which was its own answer. The kitchen clock ticked. Rain had started again outside the window. "I want to offer you a position," Seo-jin said, "inside Baekwa Holdings, the legitimate arm, leadership development, project management. You would be compensated properly. Your mother's medical costs would be covered." Amar's mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Why?" "Because I've spent 30 years surrounded by people who only give when they want something. And you gave when you had nothing and wanted nothing back. That is not common, Amara. In fact, in my experience, it is nearly impossible to find." The rain hit the window. Amara did not move from the counter. Her face had gone through several things quickly and had settled into something guarded and precise. "I'm not a criminal," she said. "I'm not asking you to be one." "I don't know anything about corporate." "I know what you don't know," Seo-jin said. "I'm more interested in what you do know. Skills can be taught. Education can be earned. But the courage to give when you have nothing cannot be bought. Not from anyone. I've tried." The silence stretched. Outside, a car passed on the wet street below and threw a brief slide of light across the ceiling. Amara uncrossed her arms. Her hands went into the front pocket of her sweatshirt. She stared at the floor for a moment. Not defeated, just thinking, the way someone thinks when the decision matters and they know it. She looked up. "I need to think about it," she said. Seo-jin nodded once. "Take 3 days." She left her direct number on a folded piece of paper on the table. Not Min-jae's line, her own, and she walked down the 4 flights of stairs and out into the rain. She did not look back at the building, but she thought about the medication schedule on the refrigerator, the wire transfer, the university logo washed almost to nothing. She had come to see. She had seen. But what she hadn't expected, what she had no framework for, after 30 years of building walls she trusted more than anything else, was the feeling that had moved through her chest when Amara said, "Because you needed it, that's it." Like something sealed too long had shifted. She didn't name it. She got in the car. She told Min-jae to drive. But that night, alone in the Gangnam Tower with the city spread out 34 floors below her, Kang Seo-jin sat at her desk without opening a single file. And she thought about a young woman eating triangle kimbap in the cold at 2:30 in the morning, and she did not understand, could not quite map it onto any model of human behavior she had spent her life building, how a person with so little could give so freely. She needed to understand it, because she could feel somewhere below the scar tissue of 3 decades that whatever Amara Williams carried inside her, she herself had once had it too, and someone had taken it. She needed to know if it could come back. 3 days later, her phone rang. Unknown number. But she had memorized the Chicago area code years ago through business. She picked up. Amara Williams said, "I'll take the position, but I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into." Seo-jin closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Come to Baekwa Holdings headquarters tomorrow at 9, she said. I'll show you everything. The line was quiet for a beat, then, everything? Everything legitimate, Seojin said. Amar said, okay, and ended the call. Seojin set the phone on her desk and looked at the city, rain-slicked and blinking, sprawling in every direction as far as she could see. What she did not know yet, what Min-jae had not discovered because no one had thought to look, was that inside Baekwa Holdings, word of Seojin's decision had already reached Junho Park. Executive Director, 15 years. The man who had bent every ambition and personal cost toward one fixed point, and that fixed point had just been handed to a stranger. Min-jae would learn this too late. By the time Amara walked through the glass doors of Baekwa Holdings the next morning, the knife was already being sharpened, and the hand holding it was smiling at the elevator, waiting to introduce himself. The elevator doors opened at 8:57 a.m., and Amara Williams stepped into the lobby of Baekwa Holdings with 3 minutes to spare and nothing to prove, which was exactly the wrong posture for a place like this. She had dressed carefully. The best thing she owned, a dark blazer she had bought 2 years ago for a job interview in Chicago that had gone nowhere, pressed slacks, flat shoes with a small scuff on the left toe she had tried to buff out with a paper towel at 6 that morning. She looked clean and composed from a distance. Up close, if you knew what to look for, you could see the effort it had cost. The lobby was enormous in the way that money announces itself without speaking. Black marble floors polished to a mirror finish, a reception desk that ran 12 feet across, abstract art on the walls that cost more than Amara's entire year of wages and was intended to make you feel that. 2 security guards near the entrance, suits fitted, faces blank. A glass wall behind reception revealed a canyon of open office space, and beyond it, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Seoul stretched out gray and wide under a November sky. Amara walked to the desk. The receptionist looked up. Her gaze traveled from Amara's face to the blazer to the scuffed shoe. It took less than a second, and she rearranged her expression into professional neutrality, but not quickly enough. I have a 9 o'clock with Kang Seo-jin, Amara said. A half beat of hesitation. Your name? Amara Williams. The receptionist typed something. Her eyes moved to the screen, then back to Amara with a fraction more deference. Whatever she saw on that screen had weight. Of course, Ms. Kang's assistant will be right down. Amara stepped back from the desk and stood with her hands at her sides. She did not look at the art. She did not look at her phone. She looked at the room and let it look back at her, which was something she had learned to do in places that were designed to make her feel like she didn't belong, because the worst thing you could do in those places was let them see you flinch. She had spent the previous 3 days in something close to controlled panic. She had called her mother, not to tell her everything, but enough. Her mother had said, Amara, baby, you have always known how to read a room. Trust that. Which was the kind of thing her mother said when she didn't have an answer but wanted to seem like she did. And Amara loved her for it. She had looked up Baekwa Holdings for 6 hours. What was public was impressive. Real estate development, humanitarian funding, infrastructure projects across 4 districts. What wasn't public existed in the spaces between news articles. Names that came up too often, transactions that closed too cleanly, rivals who stepped back without explanation. She wasn't naive. She knew what the syndicate was. She had made her decision anyway, and she had made it with her eyes open, which was the only way she knew how to make decisions. The elevator opened and a man stepped out. He was not Min-jae. He was taller, slimmer, dressed in a charcoal suit that had been cut specifically for his body, with the kind of posture that came from years of believing you were the most important person in any room you entered. He was Korean, mid-40s, with a face that wore pleasantness the way a knife wears a sheath, convincingly, but you could feel the shape of what was underneath. He crossed the lobby toward her with his hand already extended, smiling with all the right muscles. Ms. Williams, he said, Junho Park, Executive Director. His English was excellent, confident, slightly too warm. Miss Kang asked me to bring you up personally. She's finishing a call. Amara shook his hand, firm grip, dry palm. He held it a beat longer than necessary. Good to meet you, she said. Likewise. His eyes moved over her with the same efficiency as the receptionist's, but with more practice behind it, so it was harder to catch. Almost. We're all very curious about you. Ms. Kang speaks highly. She's been generous, Amara said carefully. She has, Park said, and something in the timbre shifted, not the word, the frequency beneath it. He turned toward the elevator and gestured for her to go first. Shall we? She stepped in. He pressed the button for the 32nd floor. The doors closed. In the mirrored panel of the elevator wall, she watched him, watching the numbers climb. And she thought, there it is. Not anger, not yet, just the specific quality of attention that a person gives something they believe has been taken from them. She had seen that look before. In the warehouse supervisor in Chicago, who had trained her for 3 months and then had to watch her get promoted past him. In the head janitor at Hansung Tower, who had clocked her hours and never said anything directly, but found small ways consistently to make the work harder than it needed to be. She knew that look the way you know the sound of weather changing. She said nothing. She watched the numbers. Seo-jin's office occupied a corner of the 32nd floor with windows on 2 sides and nothing decorative inside it. No plants, no personal photos, no awards mounted to walls. A desk, a conference table, several chairs, a whiteboard covered in handwritten figures that someone had partially erased. It was the office of someone who worked in it rather than performed in it, and Amara registered that difference. Seo-jin was standing at the window when they entered, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand on the glass. She turned when the door opened. She did not smile, but something in her face shifted that functioned the same way. She ended the call and set the phone on the desk. To Park, she said in Korean, "Thank you, Min-jun, that's all." It was a small thing, calling him the wrong name. Not his name at all. Min-jun instead of Jun-ho. Amara did not speak Korean, but she registered the flicker that passed across Park's face before he reassembled it and gave a small bow and left. The door closed behind him. Seo-jin looked at Amara. "He told you his title in the elevator?" "First thing," Amara said. "He does that." She gestured to the chair across from the desk. "Sit. Do you want anything?" "No." They sat across from each other. Daylight lay flat and cold through the window glass. Seo-jin had her hands folded on the desk, and she looked at Amara the way you look at something you need to assess before you can trust, which at least had the virtue of being honest. "I told the board this morning," Seo-jin said, "that you were joining the leadership program." The response was what I expected. "Which was?" "Questions about your background, your qualifications." She paused. "Your origin." Amara held her gaze. "And what did you say?" "That you were qualified in the ways that matter, and that the rest would come." She said it without heat, just information. "I don't usually explain my decisions. I made an exception this morning because I want you to understand the environment. It will not be comfortable." "Is it supposed to be?" Seo-jin looked at her for a moment. "No," she said. "It's not." They talked for 90 minutes. Seo-jin laid out the structure of Baekwa Holdings, the legitimate arm, its projects, its portfolio of community development initiatives spread across 4 districts of Seoul and 2 provinces. She spoke about the upcoming Namsan Urban Renewal Project, the company's largest humanitarian infrastructure investment in a decade, and how it was currently in development phase, moving toward a major investor presentation in 6 weeks. She wanted Amara in the leadership track, beginning immediately as a project associate, with the expectation that she would take increasing responsibility as she demonstrated the capacity for it. Amara listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions. The timeline for the investor presentation, whether the project had existing community liaisons, and whether the financial reporting was handled internally or through a third-party auditor. The questions were good. Seo-jin answered them. And something in her eyes each time, not surprise, but something adjacent to it, told Amara that the questions had landed correctly, which she filed away and did not respond to visibly. When they finished, Seo-jin walked her through the 32nd floor personally and introduced her to the 4 members of the project development team she'd be working with. 3 of them shook her hand and were professionally cordial in the careful way of people who had received instructions to be cordial. The 4th, a young woman named Kim Yuna, just said hi and handed her a thick folder without ceremony, which Amara appreciated most. Junho Park was not present for any of these introductions. Amara noticed. Her first 2 weeks were a pressure test conducted without anyone acknowledging it was a pressure test. She arrived before anyone else. She left after. She read everything in the Namsan project folder twice, then a third time, and she built a working map in a notebook she carried everywhere of the project's structure, funding sources, community stakeholders, projected timelines, gaps in the current community engagement plan. The gaps were substantial. The community liaison work was surface level, and the immigrant neighborhood data was incomplete to the point of being nearly useless for actual planning purposes. She flagged this in her first project meeting, carefully, framing it as a question rather than a critique. 3 of her team members looked at their papers. The fourth, Kim Yuna, wrote something down. Park Junho sat at the end of the table for this meeting, which he had not been scheduled to attend. He had simply appeared. He listened to Amar's flag with his hands folded on the table and his face arranged in the expression of someone taking a thing seriously. "Interesting observation," he said, when she finished. "Though, of course, the community data was developed by a senior research team over 8 months. One might want to review it fully before suggesting gaps." "I have reviewed it fully," Amara said. Page 43 lists Yongsan-gu immigrant household count as 4,300. The sole municipal data from last quarter puts it at closer to 11,000. A silence around the table. Park's smile stayed where it was. "Municipal data has its own margin of error." "Of course," Amara said. "I'd want to cross-reference both. I'm not trying to undermine the research. I just think if the numbers are off in Yongsan-gu, they might be off in the other districts too, and the investor presentation is in 4 weeks. Kim Yuna looked up. "She's right," she said simply, to the room. "We should check." Park looked at Yuna. The look lasted 1 second, maybe less. Then he looked back at Amara with the same pleasant arrangement of features, and he said, "Of course. Thorough work is always welcome." The meeting ended. People filed out. Amara gathered her folder, and when she looked up, Park was still at the table. Not leaving, just sitting there. And he waited until the room was empty, and then he said quietly, with a different quality to his voice than the one he used in groups, "You're very eager for someone in their first month." Amara stood across the table from him. "I'm trying to do the job well." "Yes." He nodded. "The question some people are asking is why you were given this job in the first place." He said it gently, which was worse than if he'd said it hard. "I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because it's what people are asking, and I'd rather you hear it from someone directly than be blindsided." Amara looked at him. "What are people asking specifically? What qualifies you?" A small shrug. "It's a legitimate question. We have people here with MBAs from Yonsei, from Kaaset, people who have been working in this field for years. The appointment was unexpected." "Ms. Kang appointed me," Amara said. "She did. Then the question of my qualifications has been answered by the person with authority to answer it." Something moved behind his eyes, fast and then gone. "Of course," he said. He stood, straightened his jacket. "I'm on your side, Ms. Williams. I want you to understand that. This environment can be hostile. You're going to need allies." He left the room. Amara stood in the empty conference room and breathed slowly through her nose for a moment. Then she picked up her folder and walked back to her desk. She did not go to Seojin. She understood instinctively that going to Seojin would confirm what Park wanted people to believe, that she couldn't survive without the hand that had placed her here. She went back to the data instead. The data work consumed the next 10 days with a focus that pushed everything else to the edges of Amara's life. She was sleeping 5 hours a night, sometimes 4. She ate at her desk. She video called her mother twice a week and kept the calls short, breezy, so her mother wouldn't hear the exhaustion and start worrying. She sent her brother a long text about his coursework and did not mention her own situation at all. Kim Yuna became something close to a functional partner during this stretch, not out of friendship exactly. They hadn't had a single conversation about anything other than work, but out of a shared commitment to the thing in front of them that had a clarity Amara respected. Yuna was 28, moved through the office with minimal social friction, and had a capacity for sustained focus that matched Amara's own. They worked in companionable silence most of the time. On the 11th day, Yuna set a corrected district table on Amara's desk without comment. The numbers across 5 districts had been cross-referenced against 3 external sources. The original research was off in every district, not by a small margin, by an average of 38% in the immigrant household counts. Amara stared at the table for a long time. "Does anyone else know about this yet?" she said. "I just finished it," Yuna said. "Okay," Amara thought. "Don't send it internally yet. Let me compile the full corrected data set first. I want it clean before it goes to anyone." Yuna looked at her. "You're worried about how it'll be received. I'm worried about what happens if it goes out half-finished and someone uses the half-finished version to say the correction is wrong." Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then, "Park, you mean?" Amara didn't answer that. "Let me finish the data set." Yuna nodded and went back to her screen. 2 days later, Amara had a corrected, sourced, fully annotated community data report that would require significant revisions to the Namsan project plan before it could go in front of investors. The changes were not minor. The project's current community engagement model was built on flawed population figures, which meant the resource distribution plan was skewed, which meant the funding allocation for immigrant district services was materially understated. It was genuinely better work. It would make the project better. It would make the investor presentation more credible. She packaged the report and sent it to Seojin with a cover memo at 7:40 in the evening. Seojin's reply came at 11:15 p.m. "Come to my office at 7 tomorrow. Bring everything. Bote." What Amara did not know, because there was no reason she would, was that her email had been intercepted. Not hacked, not stolen in any cinematic way. Junho Park had a quiet arrangement with one of the IT systems managers, a man named Baek, who had been passed over for promotion 3 years running and had the specific bitterness of someone with technical access and nowhere to aim it. Park had cultivated this relationship carefully over 18 months, the way you tend something you expect to need eventually. When Amara's email traffic started showing data work outside normal hours, Baek flagged it. When the corrected district report was packaged and sent, Baek had a copy on Park's laptop within 4 minutes. Park read the report. He sat in his office on the 29th floor with the document open, and he read it in full, twice, and the quality of his stillness during those 40 minutes was the kind that lives in the body after a long time spent controlling very specific feelings. The report was good. He knew it immediately. It was the kind of work that changed the trajectory of a project, and anyone who presented it would be recognized as the person who caught what everyone else had missed. He knew this because he had spent 15 years being that person. He was, despite everything, good at what he did. And this woman who had been here for less than 3 weeks, with no corporate background, no credentials he could locate, appointed for reasons he had heard whispered about and partly understood and could not fully accept, she had done it. In 11 days. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark of his office for a while, the city light soft through the window, and he thought about the 15 years, the projects he had salvaged quietly, the crises he had managed from behind other people's names, the patience he had maintained year after year, waiting for Seojin to see that he was the one who could carry Baekwa Holdings into the next phase. He had a daughter who was 9 years old and had never once seen him eat dinner at home on a weekday. He had a wife who had stopped asking when he'd be back because the asking had cost them both too much. He had given everything to this building, to this company, to the woman on the 32nd floor who had looked at a stranger in a grocery store and decided that stranger was worth more than his 15 years. He picked up his phone. He called Baek. "The investor presentation files," he said. "The financial projection models. I need access." Baek said, "Those are locked at the CFO level." "I know what level they're locked at," Park said. "I need access." A long pause, then, "What am I looking for?" "Nothing," Park said. "I just need to make a few adjustments." The next morning, Amara was in Seojin's office at 7 sharp. Seojin had the report printed and annotated in red. Min-jae was at the side table, silent, which Amara had learned was simply where he existed in proximity to Seojin at all times. This is significant work, Seojin said, without preamble, without performance. The district data needs to be completely revised before the presentation. I know, Amara said. That's why I sent it now. We have 17 days. It will require changes to the funding allocation model. Yes. That model was signed off by Junho and the CFO in August. Amara was quiet for a beat. The data it was built on was wrong. Seojin looked at her. I know that, she said. I'm telling you who will object to changing it. Then they need to see the corrected data. Yes. Seojin set the report down. I'm going to bring this to the full project team tomorrow morning. I want you to present it. The corrected findings and the recommended changes to the allocation model. Amara felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. Something adjacent. The understanding that this was the moment Park had been waiting for. An arena, a spotlight, and reasons already prepared for why she didn't belong in either. Okay, she said. He'll push back, Seojin said, and she didn't specify who because she didn't need to. I know. Can you hold it? Amara looked at her. I built it from the ground up and I can source every number. Yes, I can hold it. Something moved in Seojin's face. Brief, contained, but genuine. Good, she said. 7:30 tomorrow. Full team. Amara left the office. In the elevator going down, she stood alone in the mirrored box and let herself feel the full weight of what was coming for approximately 4 seconds. Then she put it somewhere back and below, the way she had learned to do with things that couldn't be addressed yet, and she rode the rest of the way down in silence. What she could not know, what none of them knew yet, was that by midnight of that same day, 3 line items in the Namsan project financial model had been quietly altered. The changes were small, subtle, the kind of alterations that don't announce themselves, that sit in the data like a hairline fracture in a bridge, invisible under normal weight, catastrophic under load. The investor presentation was now 16 days away, and the document Amara would stand up and present to a room full of people she had not yet earned the trust of would contain numbers she had never written, attributed to work she had done. And when the fracture showed, and it would show, because these things always showed under load, there would be only one name on the report. Hers. She did not sleep well that night. Not because she was afraid, but because something in the back of her body knew, the way the body knows weather before the sky shows it, that the ground she was standing on had already shifted beneath her feet. She just didn't know yet that it had been moved on purpose. She was at her desk by 5:40 the next morning. The office was empty at that hour. The cleaning crew had finished an hour before, and the first early arrivals wouldn't come until 7. Amara had let herself in with the access card Yuna had shown her how to use, and she sat in the blue-gray pre-dawn quiet of the project room with her corrected report spread across the desk in front of her and went through it one more time, line by line, source by source, every figure tied back to its origin document, every projection annotated with methodology. It was clean. She knew it was clean. She had built it clean. She got coffee from the machine in the break room. Black, no sugar, because the machine didn't have sugar and she had stopped noticing. And she stood at the window while it cooled and looked at Seoul coming awake in the gray morning light, buses moving slow through wet streets below, the Han River a dark ribbon in the distance. She thought about her mother, about the medication schedule taped to the refrigerator in Guro, about her brother's tuition payment due in 3 weeks. She thought about the specific cost of being here. Not money, not status, but the cost in the currency of exposure, of having stepped into a room where the stakes were real and the people around her had spent years learning how to make rooms like this dangerous for people like her. She drank the coffee. She went back to the desk. She read the report one more time. At 7:25, she walked into the conference room on the 32nd floor, set her materials at the head of the table, and waited. They came in over the next 5 minutes. The project team, 4 of them, including Yuna, who gave Amara one brief look of acknowledgement and sat down without ceremony. 2 senior analysts from the finance division, whose names Amara had learned but who had not made any effort to learn hers. The CFO, a compact man named Shin, who wore his authority the way some men wore expensive watches, as information. Seojin entered last and took a chair at the side, not the head, which Amara understood meant she was there to observe rather than chair, which put the weight squarely in Amara's direction. Junho Park came in at 7:32, 2 minutes late, and took the chair at the far end of the table with the ease of someone who understood that the power of an entrance is not always in its timing. He set a leather portfolio on the table, uncapped a pen, and looked at Amara with a pleasant expression that had the specific texture of someone who has already decided the outcome of a conversation and is waiting with patience. They don't need to perform. Amara began. She walked through the corrected district data methodically, not rushing, not over-explaining, laying each piece down with the steadiness of someone who has done the work and knows it. The room was quiet, in the particular way of rooms where people are paying attention but not yet willing to show it. She moved from population figures to the discrepancy analysis, showing the gap between the original research and the corrected cross-referenced data, showing it was consistent across all 5 districts and was not a rounding error or a methodology disagreement, but a fundamental flaw in the source data. When she reached the implications for the funding allocation model, she paused and looked at Shin directly. The current allocation understates the immigrant district service need by approximately 42%, she said, which means if we present to investors on the current model, we're presenting a plan that underserves the communities it's designed to help, and we're presenting it with numbers that won't survive external due diligence. Shin looked at the figures in front of him. He had not looked at Park since sitting down, which Amara noted. Where did the original source data come from? Shin asked. The project brief attributes it to a senior research team contracted in the spring, Amara said. The contractor's name is in the appendix. I'd recommend a conversation with them about methodology before the presentation, in case they have data that addresses the gaps. But based on what's in the file, I don't think that's likely. A silence. Then Park spoke. I want to make sure I understand what we're being asked to accept here, he said. He had not looked at his portfolio. He was looking at Amara with a quality of calm that had steel underneath it. 8 months of professional research, contracted at significant cost and reviewed by this team, is being characterized as fundamentally flawed on the basis of 3 weeks of analysis by someone in her first corporate position. Amara kept her eyes on him. It's being characterized as flawed on the basis of the municipal data, which is public, sourced, and current. The work I did was cross-referencing. The finding isn't mine. It's in the comparison. Cross-referencing requires interpretive judgment, Park said, which is a skill developed over time. The Yongsan-gu figure is 4,300 in the original report, Amara said. The Seoul Municipal Registry from last quarter has it at 11,200. That's not an interpretation. That's a number. Yuna said, without looking up from her copy of the report. I verified the cross-reference independently. The discrepancy holds. Park looked at Yuna the way he had looked at her in the meeting 2 weeks ago. That single second, contained, cold. Then back to Amara. Even granting the data discrepancy, he said, the proposal to revise the allocation model 16 days before the investor presentation is, at minimum, operationally disruptive. At worst, it signals internal dysfunction to the very people we're asking to commit capital. Presenting a flawed model signals it worse, Amara said. That's an opinion. It's an investor relations standard. The room was very still. Shin was looking between them. Seojin had not moved or spoken, and Amara could feel the weight of her attention from the side of the table the way you feel heat. Not seeing it, just knowing it's there. Park opened his portfolio. He removed a single sheet and set it on the table. I'd like to draw the room's attention to the financial projection model, he said, specifically the sensitivity analysis on page 8 of the current investor presentation document. Ms. Williams, perhaps you can walk us through your figures. Amara looked at him. Page 8 of the presentation document is the CFO's division. I submitted the community data report. I didn't have access to the presentation financials. You didn't review the projection model before this meeting? Park said, with a quality of surprise that was precisely calibrated to land in front of witnesses. I reviewed what I built, Amara said, which is what I presented. Park slid the sheet across the table toward Shin. The sensitivity analysis in the current deck was updated last night. There are 3 line items on page 8 that show, I'll use neutral language, some irregularities, items that appear in a version of the community data analysis that circulated internally. He paused. Items that don't match the figures Ms. Williams just presented. Amara felt something shift in the room. It was not loud. It was the kind of shift that happens in the air before the temperature drops, a change in pressure, in the quality of stillness. That's not possible, she said. Her voice came out steady, which took something. I have the document here, Park said. Shin took the sheet. He looked at it. His eyes moved from the sheet to Amara's report and back. Where did this version originate? Shin asked. It was forwarded to me last night by a member of the IT team who flagged it as a version discrepancy, Park said. I'd recommend an internal audit before proceeding. Amara's hands were flat on the table in front of her. She was aware of them. She was aware of her breathing, which she was keeping even through a specific act of will, and she was aware of the room, every eye in it. And the quality of attention had changed. It was the attention of people reassessing, not hostile, not decided, but open in the wrong direction. I want to see that document, she said. Park looked at her. Of course. He slid his copy across the table. She picked it up. The format was correct. Her header, her structure, her district breakdown. The corrected population figures were hers. But on the back 2 pages, embedded in the projection extrapolation section she had not written, had not had access to write, there were 3 figures that were wrong, not subtly wrong. Wrong in the specific way that looked like error and felt, when you understood what they affected, like intention. The numbers skewed the service cost projections down in a way that made the funding allocation gap appear smaller than it was. It made her correction look overstated. It made her look like she had inflated the problem. She set the document down. She looked at it on the table in front of her. The room was quiet. She said, I didn't write those figures. The silence that followed was a different kind. They're in a document with your name on it, Park said, not unkindly. Someone put them there. Ms. Williams. Someone accessed my files and altered the document, she said. Her voice was still level. She was spending a significant amount of herself on level. I can show you the version I sent to Ms. Kang last night. The figures in the back section don't exist in that version. They were added after. Do you have that version with you? Shin asked. It's in my email. I can pull it in 30 seconds. Park spread his hands in a gesture of openness. By all means. She took out her phone. She opened her email. She found the message to Seo-jin from 7:40 the previous evening, opened the attachment, and her hand stopped. The attachment opened. She looked at it. The back 2 pages. The same figures. Already there, her own email, her own send time. The wrong numbers, already there. She stared at the screen for long enough that it became its own kind of answer to the room. Ms. Williams, Shin said. She looked up. She looked at Park. His face was neutral, professionally concerned, and underneath the professional concern there was nothing. Not gloating, not relief, nothing readable at all, which was worse than anything she had expected to find there. I need to step out for a moment, she said. Well, she made it to the women's restroom on the 32nd floor before her hands started shaking. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, the way her mother had taught her when panic came. Not to feel the cold, but to give the nervous system something specific to respond to besides itself. She breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. 4 counts. 4 counts. Someone had gotten into her email before it sent, or they had gotten into the server copy after. Either way, it required access she didn't have and couldn't explain, which meant she couldn't prove anything, which meant she was standing in a meeting room in front of 7 people with a document that carried her name and numbers she had never written. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face looked back at her with the particular expressionlessness that comes when a person has been hit with something and the body is still deciding what it is. She thought, go back in there. She had no evidence. She had nothing. She had her word against a document that had her name on it, and had been sent from her account at a timestamp she could verify but couldn't explain. She had 3 weeks of work in a place she hadn't been invited into, where half the room was waiting to confirm what they'd already decided about her, and the other half was watching to see which way the weight fell. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She went back in. Seojin had not moved from her chair. When Amara came back into the room, Seojin's eyes found her immediately, and whatever she read in Amara's face, the steadiness of it, the specific quality of someone who has absorbed a blow and is still standing, something in Seojin's own face changed by a fraction. Amara sat down. "I understand how this looks," she said to the room without preamble. "I want to be clear about what I'm saying. I did not write those figures. I believe the document was altered after I submitted it. I don't have proof of that in front of me right now. What I do have is the corrected community data, which stands on its own sourcing regardless of what's in those back pages, and I'd like to ask the CFO's office to audit the projection model independently before the presentation moves forward." Shin looked at her. He looked at Seojin. Seojin said to the room, "We'll take a 20-minute break." It was not a suggestion. People stood and filed out. Park was last, and as he passed Amara's chair, he paused, just briefly, just one beat, and said quietly enough for only her, "I told you you'd need allies." Then he left. Seojin closed the conference room door and they were alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city sat gray and wide in the window glass. Seojin stood with her arms at her sides and looked at Amara with something in her face that was not doubt. It was something harder than doubt and more specific. "Tell me what happened," she said. Amara told her. All of it. Yuna's data verification, the report she had built, the email she had sent, and what she had seen when she opened the attachment in the meeting. She spoke without embellishment and without appeal. She laid the facts in order, and she stopped when the facts stopped. Seojin listened without moving. When Amara finished, Seojin said, "The figures in the back section, were they there when you sent it?" "No." "You're certain?" "I wrote the document from scratch. Those pages didn't exist in my version. I didn't have access to the projection model. Shin's division controls that. I couldn't have added financial projections without the source files." Seojin was quiet for a moment. "Someone with system access altered the email server copy," she said. "That's what I think." "That requires a specific kind of access." "I know." Seojin looked at the window. Her jaw moved slightly, a small tightening, the only visible indicator of something working underneath the surface. "I'll have Min-jae pull the server logs," she said. "If someone touched your files, it'll be in there." "What about the presentation?" Amara said. "The presentation doesn't move forward until I say it does." Seojin turned from the window. "The question in front of you right now is simpler than that." Amara looked at her. "The room believes what's in that document," Seojin said. "Most of them. And even if we pull the logs and find what I think we'll find, that takes time we don't have before the break ends. In 20 minutes, you have to walk back into that room and hold your ground in front of people who have already made a decision about you, with nothing in your hands but your own word." "I know," Amara said. "Can you do that?" Amara felt something in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite fear, something that lived between them and was older than both. The specific feeling of having been set up to fail in a place where you were already considered provisional, where your presence was already a question someone was looking to answer. "I don't have another option," she said. Seojin looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "You don't." She walked to the door. Her hand on the handle, she stopped and said without turning, "When you go back in, don't defend the document. Don't argue the figures. Ask for the audit and then stop talking. Let the silence work." She opened the door and left. Amara sat alone in the conference room for the remaining 9 minutes of the break. She thought about the woman in the market, the cashier's voice. If you don't have the money, step aside. She had stepped forward then because someone needed something, and she had it to give. She did not have anything to give right now. She had her word, and she had the data, and she had the knowledge of what she had built, and none of it was visible in a way the room could touch. She sat with that. And then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and waited for them to come back. They came back. She asked for the audit. She said it clearly, without apology, without argument. She said, "The community data stands on its sourcing, which can be verified independently. The figures in the projection section are not mine, and I'm asking for a forensic audit of the server records before this presentation moves forward. I understand this creates a delay, and I take full responsibility for flagging a problem I cannot currently prove, but I believe the integrity of this presentation and this project requires it." Then she stopped talking. The silence in the room was long. Shin said, to no one in particular, "A server audit is a reasonable request if there's a version discrepancy question." Park said, measured, careful. "Of course, though I'd want to note that a delay of this nature, 2 weeks before a presentation of this magnitude, is not a neutral event. Investors have already received the meeting confirmation. Rescheduling signals uncertainty." "Presenting false data signals at worst," Yuna said. Park looked at her. Yuna looked back at him with a steadiness that had clearly been building for a while and had simply now found somewhere to go. Seo-jin, from her chair at the side, said, "The audit proceeds. The presentation is postponed pending findings. That's the decision." She stood. "Min-jae will coordinate with IT this afternoon. I want the server log review complete by end of day tomorrow." She looked at no one specifically and left the room. Park gathered his portfolio. He did not look at Amara as he stood. He did not look at Yuna. He walked to the door with the same measured bearing he had carried in, and at the threshold he paused. Not to say anything, just the pause itself, the beat of a man recalibrating. And then he left. The room emptied. Amara sat at the head of the table in the silence afterward, and she let herself feel, for exactly as long as it took to feel it, and not 1 second longer, the full weight of how close to the edge she was standing. The server logs came back at 11:47 the following evening. Min-jae brought them to Seo-jin's office personally. Amara was there. Seo-jin had called her at 9 and told her to come in and wait, which she had done, sitting in one of the chairs at the side table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, while Seo-jin worked through other business at her desk with the particular compartmentalized focus of someone who has learned not to let one fire consume attention needed for the others. When Min-jae came in, his face said what his words were about to before he said them, and Seo-jin saw it and set down her pen. He placed the log report on the desk. System access to the outgoing mail server occurred at 11:17 p.m., the night before the presentation meeting, he said. The access used a credentials set belonging to IT infrastructure management. The modification to the email attachment took 4 minutes. He paused. The credentials traced to a user account registered to a Baek Sung-min, systems administrator. 3rd floor. Seo-jin did not look at the report. She looked at Min-jae. "And Baek reports to whom?" Min-jae's face was flat. "Administratively, to the IT director. But his personnel file shows a prior departmental secondment. He worked on a cross-functional project team for 18 months, ending 2 years ago." A pause. "Executive Director Park's team." The room was very quiet. Amar had stopped breathing for a moment. She started again, slowly. Seo-jin was still looking at Min-jae. Something was happening in her face. Not rage, which would have been easier to read, but something colder and more precise. The specific expression of a woman who has built an empire on the ability to assess betrayal without letting the assessment consume her. "Where is Baek now?" she said. "Building. I had eyes on him when the logs came in." "Keep them there." She picked up the report. She read it, the full page, without speaking. Then she set it down. She said, "And Park?" "Also in the building. He was in his office until about 30 minutes ago. He's in the executive parking structure now. I have confirmation he's still in the building. His car hasn't moved." Seo-jin looked at the window. The city outside was late-night quiet, the towers lit and the streets below moving slow. She said, without turning, "Amara." Amara said, "Yes." "Go home." Amara looked at her. "I want to be here when—" "I know what you want," Seo-jin said. Not unkind. Specific. "Go home. What happens next is not something you should be in the building for. Not because I'm protecting you, because if you are here when it happens, everything that comes after becomes something you were part of in a way that follows you. Amara understood what she was being told. Not all of it, but enough. She stood. She picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped. "He spent 15 years here," she said. Seojin turned from the window and looked at her. "That's not nothing," Amara said. "Whatever he did. That's not nothing." Something shifted in Seojin's face that Amara couldn't fully read in the low light of the office. It was not agreement. It was not dismissal. It was the face of someone who has been handed an inconvenient truth at a moment when inconvenient truths are expensive and is choosing not to discard it. She said nothing. Amara left. She rode the elevator down alone. In the lobby, the night security gave her a nod. She pushed through the glass doors into the cold and stood on the pavement outside Baekwa Holdings for a moment. The night air cold on her face, the street quiet around her, the tower rising above her with its lights burning on every floor. She had survived the day. She had done it without losing the thing that had brought her here. The refusal to misrepresent, the refusal to let the weight of the room change what was true. She had not bent the data. She had not protected herself by letting the wrong numbers stand. She had stood in front of people who had already decided about her, and she had said the true thing and taken the hit that came with it. She was still standing, but she understood, riding the subway home through the empty late-night stations, that surviving this had changed the nature of the game she was in. She had come into Baekwa Holdings thinking the battle was proving herself capable. She understood now that the battle was something older and less fair than that. It was the battle that every person fights who walks into a room where power has already been arranged and is not interested in being rearranged. And she understood that the woman on the 32nd floor who had watched her stand in that conference room and had seen what she was made of, that woman was about to make a decision about Junho Park that would have consequences Amara could not fully trace, in a world Amara did not fully understand, and that decision would define what kind of empire Baekwa Holdings actually was. She thought about what she had said at the door. He spent 15 years here. That's not nothing. She had meant it. She still meant it. But she also knew, as the train moved through the dark tunnels under Seoul, that what happened to Park tonight was no longer in her hands, and that the woman she had said it to was the Ice Queen of the Baekwa Syndicate, who had built 30 years of power on the principle that betrayal has a cost that must be collected, and that mercy was a word that had never appeared in any of her operational decisions. What Seojin would do with a man who had tried to destroy Amara, and in doing so had challenged the judgment of the one person in this empire you did not challenge, was not something Amara could predict. And it was not something, she realized with a cold clarity, that settled into her chest and stayed there, that she was certain she wanted to know. The executive parking structure beneath Baekwa Holdings had 4 levels and no windows. And at 11:53 p.m., it was empty of everything except fluorescent light and the smell of concrete and exhaust, and the particular cold that underground spaces hold longer than anywhere else. Park Junho sat in the driver's seat of his car on level 2 with the engine off. He had been sitting there for 40 minutes. He had not called his wife. He had not called anyone. He had his phone in his hand and the screen had gone dark twice from inactivity, and he had woken it twice and then done nothing with it. On the passenger seat, his leather portfolio. Inside it, nothing that mattered anymore. He knew. He did not know exactly what form it would take or exactly when, but he had spent 15 years inside this organization, and he understood its rhythms the way you understand the weather patterns of a place you've lived long enough. And he knew that what he had done, what Beck had done, what he had asked Beck to do, left traces, because everything left traces, and the only question was how long before someone followed them. The answer, it turned out, was 22 hours. He heard the elevator before the doors opened. One set of footsteps, then a second. He watched the rearview mirror. Min-jae came around the corner of the parking column first, with a man he didn't know 2 steps behind. Min-jae moved with the unhurried precision of someone who has been doing this long enough that urgency is a choice rather than a reflex, and he had made a different choice tonight. Park did not try to start the car. He did not reach for anything. He opened the door and got out and stood beside the vehicle and waited, which was perhaps the only dignified thing left available to him. Min-jae stopped 6 feet away. "Ms. Kang wants to see you," he said. Park said, "I assumed." "Now." "Yes." He straightened his jacket, force of habit. The jacket didn't need straightening. "All right." Seojin was not in her office. She was in the building's private conference room on the 34th floor, the one without windows, the one that did not appear on the publicly accessible floor plans, the one used for conversations that did not benefit from natural light or the implication of transparency. The room held a long table, 8 chairs, recessed lighting set low, and nothing else. No water, no notepads, nothing to do with your hands. Park entered alone. Min-jae closed the door behind him and did not come in. Seo-jin was standing at the far end of the table. She was not in her corporate clothes. She had changed at some point into something darker, simpler, and the absence of the executive presentation had the effect of making her look more like what she actually was, which was more unsettling, not less. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at him with an expression that was not anger. It was something older than anger and more final. Park stood at the other end of the table. The length of it between them felt significant. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Seo-jin said, "Sit down." He sat. She didn't. She placed the server log report on the table and slid it down to him without walking the length of the table, pushed it so it traveled the polished surface and stopped in front of his folded hands. He looked at it. He did not touch it. "Baek Sung-min," she said. Park said nothing. "Your secondment team. 18 months, 2 years ago." She moved around the side of the table, not toward him, just moving, the way something moves when it's contained and needs the space. "He had your personal mobile number in his recent calls, 17 times in the past 3 weeks. Park looked at the report on the table. His hands were still. He was aware of them being still, and he was making no effort to change that because any movement felt like a tell, and he was past the point where tells mattered, but the body keeps its habits. "How long have you known?" he said. "The logs came in 2 hours ago," she said. "No." He looked up at her. "How long have you known it was going to be something? From me?" She stopped moving. She looked at him from the side of the table, 6 feet away, and the low light caught the angle of her face, and she looked tired in a way that was not about tonight. "Long enough," she said. He breathed out through his nose. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was waiting to be wrong," she said. Flat. No drama in it. "I wanted to be wrong." That landed somewhere in his chest in a way he hadn't expected, and he looked at the table for a moment. The leather of his portfolio on the surface of the table in front of him. He had bought that portfolio at a shop on Cheongdam-dong 8 years ago on the day he was promoted to senior director, and he had carried it to every meeting since. And he was aware of it right now as an object with a before and an after that were separated by this room. 15 years, he said. "I know." "I salvaged the Incheon deal," he said. Not as argument, as fact, as a man putting things into a record. "I managed the Busan restructuring for 14 months without anyone outside knowing there was a problem. I found the accounting exposure in the Jeju acquisition before it could have become a criminal issue. I did that." "I know what you did," Seo-jin said. "Then you know that what I built for this company." "I know what you built." Her voice had not risen. That was almost worse. "I know it completely. And I know you know that I know it, which means you also know that the question in this room is not about your contributions. It never was." He looked at her. "The question," she said, "is what you chose to do when I made a decision you didn't agree with." Park's jaw tightened. There it was, the center of it. "You handed my position to someone who had been here 3 weeks, he said. And now something was moving under his voice, something that had been held down for a long time and was finding the pressure of this room too much to stay down under. Someone with no background, no credentials, no understanding of what this company is or what it costs to build. You handed her the project I spent 2 years developing the groundwork for, and you did it because she bought you bread." The last word landed in the room. Seo-jin looked at him. "That's what it was," he said. "A grocery store, a stranger. And you looked at her and you decided that whatever she had was worth more than what I'd given you for 15 years. So don't talk to me about choices. You made yours first." The room was very quiet. Seo-jin walked to the chair at the head of the table and sat down. She did not sit the way she sat in board meetings, upright, contained, projecting. She sat the way a person sits when they're going to say something true, and they want the weight of their body to mean it. "You're not wrong," she said. He had not expected that. What you felt was real, she said. What you built was real. The 15 years were real, and I know what they cost you, and I'm not telling you they don't matter. She folded her hands on the table. What I'm telling you is that the answer was not what you did. There wasn't another answer. There was, she said. You could have come to me. He looked at her. And something shifted, briefly, something young and old at the same time, something that had been in his face before the 15 years had accumulated and calcified and become what they had become. Would you have heard me? He said. She was quiet. Would you actually have heard me? He said. Or would you have listened and made the same decision, and I would have left that conversation with less than I came in with? She did not answer immediately, and the fact that she didn't answer immediately told him something, and told her something too, and they sat with it, the honest weight of it, in the windowless room at midnight. I don't know, she said. His hands, still on the table, pressed down slightly. Not rage. The opposite. The specific deflation of a man who has been handed the truth he needed and found it didn't fix anything. What happens now? He said. Seojin looked at him. You have a choice. That's what this is, a choice. Take responsibility for what you did, she said, fully, on record. You cooperate with the internal review, you accept the terms I set, you make restitution where I determine it's owed, you lose the directorship, you lose access to the operational side. She paused. Or you leave this building tonight with what you carry and you never come back, and you spend the rest of your life knowing that the thing you built here is the thing you also destroyed. Park stared at the table. Outside the room, somewhere in the building, something mechanical cycled. An HVAC unit, or an elevator moving in its shaft, a low vibration that traveled through the floor. And if I take responsibility, he said. Then you rebuild, she said. Somewhere, not here, but somewhere. You're not... He stopped. He started again. People in your position don't offer rebuilding. People in my position, she said, have been doing a lot of things differently lately. He looked at her, and there was something in his face that might, if you were being generous, have been the beginning of something. Not gratitude. It was too early and too raw for gratitude. But the beginning of an understanding that this room was not the room he had prepared for. He had prepared for consequences. He had sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes, preparing himself for the specific consequences that a decision made in this building looked like when applied by the person he knew Kang Seojin to be. He had prepared for Min Jae walking him out of a building he had given 15 years to and not walking back in. He had not prepared for a choice. He breathed. I'll take responsibility, he said. Amara did not sleep. She lay on her sleeping mat in the Guro apartment with the city quiet outside and the medication schedule visible in her peripheral vision, and she stared at the ceiling and went through the day in her head, not to punish herself with it, but because the need to understand what had happened to her was stronger than the need for rest. At 2:14 a.m., her phone lit up. A message from a number she didn't have saved. 2 sentences. Server logs confirmed. Your report stands as submitted. She read it twice. Set the phone on the mat beside her. Stared at the ceiling. She felt, not relief exactly. Relief is what you feel when the danger was external. This was something else. The specific sensation of having been tested by something that wanted to break you down to the root and having come back from it with the root still intact. She thought about Park. About 15 years. About the things she had said at the door. She thought about Seojin's face when she'd said it. At 3 a.m., she sat up and opened her notebook and started working. Not because she had to, because there was a presentation to rebuild and 16 days had become 14 and the community data revision wasn't going to write itself. And she had learned somewhere in the previous 8 hours that the thing she trusted most in herself was not her ability to survive the politics of a room like this. It was her ability to return to the work. The work was something she understood. The work did not have an agenda. She worked until 5:30, slept 90 minutes, and was back at her desk in Bakwa Holdings by 8. What? The next 9 days had a different quality than anything that had come before. The internal review of Park's access was handled quietly. Min Jae ran it with 2 people from outside the company's regular operations, and the findings were documented and sealed at Seo-jin's instruction. Baek Sung-min submitted his resignation on the third day, which was the option he'd been given in lieu of the alternative, and he took it. Park had not been seen in the building after the night in the windowless room, but neither had any of the other things that Amara had, in her darker moments of that first night, half expected. The board received a communication from Seo-jin that characterized the presentation delay as a proactive data quality review and positioned it as evidence of the company's commitment to accuracy before investor engagement. Shin forwarded her a single line in response. Good call. Amara rebuilt the funding allocation model from the corrected community data. She worked with Shin's team directly this time. Shin had, without announcement or explanation, begun treating her differently in the specific way that senior people treat someone once they've watched them stand in a room and not break. Not warmly, not with any performance of respect, just directly, and with the efficiency of someone who had stopped looking for a reason to dismiss her. Yuna was beside her for most of it. They still didn't talk about anything other than work, which suited them both. On the morning of the 12th day after the aborted presentation, Amara finished the revised investor deck and sent it to Seo-jin at 6:45 a.m. Seo-jin's response came at 7. Come to the 32nd floor at 8. Bring Yuna. The meeting was small. Seo-jin, Min-jae at his customary side position, Shin, Amara, and Yuna. No one else. The revised deck was open on the conference table, and Seo-jin went through it page by page with the focused attention of someone who had built enough to know immediately when something was built correctly. She asked 3 questions. All 3 were answered accurately, 2 by Amara and 1 by Yuna. And after the 3rd question, Seo-jin closed the document and looked at the room. The presentation is rescheduled for Thursday, she said. Same investor group, same venue. I'll open. Amara presents the community development framework. Shin handles the financial model. She looked at Amara. You'll get questions about the delay. I know what to say, Amara said. What will you say? That we identified a data discrepancy during internal review and corrected it before presenting to investors, because presenting accurate information is more important than presenting on schedule. Seo-jin looked at her for a moment. Yes, she said. That's what you'll say. They went through the logistics for another 30 minutes, and then the meeting ended and people stood, and Shin, leaving, paused near the door and said to Amara without looking directly at her, the revised allocation model is cleaner than the original, better structured. He went out. Amara and Yuna were last out. In the hallway, Yuna said simply, You didn't sleep for 3 days. 2, Amara said. It shows. I know. Yuna looked at her. It was good work, she said. And then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button, and that was the full extent of it, which was, Amara understood, high praise from a person for whom words had costs. Thursday came with clear sky for the first time in 2 weeks. Cold, hard, winter-sharp light that made the city look like something cut from glass. The investor group was 7 people, 3 from a South Korean development fund, 2 from a European social impact organization, and 2 independent partners who had worked with Baekwa Holdings on previous infrastructure projects, and whose presence carried a validation weight that Seo-jin had clearly factored into the room's composition. They sat on one side of a long table in the presentation suite on the 31st floor, which had windows and natural light and the deliberate warmth of a room designed to make capital feel comfortable. Seo-jin opened. She was precise and authoritative and spent 4 minutes on context and then handed the room to Amara. Amara stood. She had stood in front of rooms before, not rooms like this, not rooms with this particular species of attention in them, the attention of people with money and the practiced neutrality of people who have learned to listen without indicating response. But she had stood in front of her supervisor at Hansung Tower to explain a scheduling conflict with 4 other workers waiting to go home. She had stood in a social services office in Chicago with her mother's medical file in her hands and presented the case for a reconsideration of a denied claim to a person who had denied it twice already. She knew what it felt like to stand in a room where the outcome mattered, and you had nothing to rely on except the preparation and the truth of what you were saying. She had both of those things. She began. The community data framework came first, population figures cross-referenced and sourced, the corrected district breakdown, and what it meant for resource distribution. She had rehearsed this enough that she could feel when the room shifted from polite attention to actual engagement, which happened around the third slide, when she put the comparative data on the screen and one of the European partners leaned forward slightly in her chair. She moved through the framework without rushing. She let the numbers do what numbers do when they're correct. They don't persuade, they demonstrate. The investment case for the Namsan Urban Renewal Project was not built on sentiment. It was built on population density, service gap analysis, infrastructure lifecycle projections, and the long-term economic return on correctly targeted community development. The story it told was compelling because it was accurate, and she had the source to put behind every number anyone asked about. At the Q&A, one of the Korean fund partners asked about the presentation delay. Amara said, "We identified a data discrepancy in our source research during internal review. We corrected it before this presentation because we believe accurate information is more important than a schedule." She looked at him directly. "The figures you saw today reflect the actual condition of the communities this project serves. That's the version you should be making a decision with." He looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote something on the pad in front of him. The second investor question came from the older of the two independent partners, a Korean man named Jung, who had been in the room with Seo-jin on previous projects and carried the particular stillness of someone who has seen many presentations and found most of them wanting. He asked about the immigrant community engagement plan, specifically whether the plan addressed language barrier challenges in the service delivery model. It was the right question. It was the question Amara had flagged in her very first project meeting, the one that had earned her the specific quality of Park's attention. She answered it for 4 minutes. She had built that section herself, drawing on conversations she'd had with community organizations in 3 of the 5 districts, conversations she had conducted in her own time, on evenings after her regular work hours because no one had asked her to and because the data without the human context was only half the picture. When she finished, Jung set his pen down. "How did you gather that community input?" he said. "I went and asked," Amar said. He looked at her. "That's it?" "That's it," she said. He picked the pen back up. The presentation ended. The investors moved to a side room for deliberation. Seo-jin, Amara, Shin, and Yuna waited in the presentation suite. Nobody talked much. Shin checked his phone. Yuna looked at the window. Seo-jin stood with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, facing the door. Amara sat and breathed. 31 minutes later, Jung came back in ahead of the others. He didn't sit down. He looked at Seo-jin and said, in Korean, something that Amara did not catch in full. She had been learning these weeks, but not enough yet. She saw Seo-jin's face, though, the thing that moved through it, brief and contained and genuine. Seo-jin turned to Amara. "They're in," she said, full commitment. The others came back into the room. There were handshakes, Shin's, Seo-jin's. One of the European partners crossed to Amara and shook her hand and said, in clear English, "The community section was the most rigorous I've seen on a project of this type. Who trained you?" Amara thought about that for 1 second. "Nobody," she said. "I just didn't want to get it wrong." The partner smiled. "A real one, not the professional kind." "That's the training," he said. The investors left at 12:47. The suite emptied. Shin gathered his materials and left with a nod that meant more than it showed. Yuna slipped out quietly. Min-jae followed 2 steps behind Seo-jin as she moved toward the door, and then she stopped, and he, understanding, stayed where he was. Seo-jin turned to Amara. They stood in the room that still had the residue of an hour of sustained attention. Papers at angles on the table, water glasses. The screen still showing the last slide of the presentation deck. The hard winter light was full through the windows now, soul bright and dense below. Seo-jin said, "How are you?" It was not a question she asked. Amar could tell from the way it came out. Slightly uncharted, as if the words were taking a route the mouth didn't usually follow. She wasn't performing concern. She was asking. "I'm okay," Amar said. "You haven't been sleeping." "No." "You should sleep." Amara almost smiled. I will tonight. Seojin looked at her. The quality of the look had something in it that Amara had not seen from her in this context. Not the assessment she had grown accustomed to, the ongoing calibration of someone deciding what you're worth. Something less strategic than that. Something that looked, if you were going to name it, and Amara was going to try, like the beginning of the thing that comes before trust, which is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to proceed despite it. I want to talk to you about the foundation, Seojin said. Not today. When you've slept. A pause. The Namsan project is the beginning. I've been building towards something larger. I want to tell you what it is, and I want to know if it's something you want to be part of. Amara looked at her. What kind of something? Something that uses what this company is to do what this company has never done, Seojin said. At scale. With permanence. She stopped as if surprised by the reach of her own words. I'll explain it properly, when you've slept. Okay, Amara said. Seojin nodded. She turned for the door. Min-jae fell in step. She paused one more time, hand not quite at the door handle, and said without turning, What you said, about Junho, that night. Amara was still. He spent 15 years, Seojin said. That's not nothing. She said it back exactly as Amara had said it, not quoting, returning something. I've been thinking about that. She opened the door and left. Amara stood alone in the presentation suite for a moment. The last slide on the screen. A projected image of the Namsan district 10 years from completion, parks and housing and community centers over a neighborhood that currently had none of those things. Something built where nothing was. The image of a possible future rendered in clean graphic lines. She looked at it. She thought about Park in whatever room he was in today, carrying whatever he was carrying. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone 3 nights ago, asking how it was going, and Amara saying, Fine, it's going fine, how are you feeling, and redirecting the way she always did. She thought about her brother's last text, a photo of his first college essay draft, sent at midnight, with a single message, Is this okay? And her response, It's more than okay. She picked up her bag. She was almost to the door when her phone rang. Unknown number, but she had learned, these past weeks, that unknown numbers in this world were not always what the word implied. She picked up. The voice on the other end was not Min-jae. It was not anyone from Baekwa Holdings. It was a man she did not recognize, speaking Korean too fast for her to follow, and then switching to English with the clipped urgency of someone who did not have time to find the right language. Ms. Williams, my name is irrelevant. What is relevant is that I have information about Baekwa Holdings that you need to hear before you go any further into that building's plans. Information about what the foundation Ms. Kang is proposing to you is built on. What it has cost people before you. Amara stood in the doorway of the presentation suite. Who are you? She said. Someone who knew what Baekwa was before it had a humanitarian division, the voice said. Someone who can show you the part of the empire she hasn't shown you. Meet me tonight, alone, and then decide if you still want what she's offering. The line was open. Amara's hand was tight on the phone. Outside the window, Seoul lay brilliant and cold in the winter light, and the future Seojin had described was close enough to almost touch. And the voice on the phone was asking her to look at what was underneath it before she reached. She did not go alone. That was the first decision, and it was the right one. And she made it standing in the doorway of the presentation suite, with Seoul burning cold through the glass, and the unknown voice still live on the phone in her hand. Tonight, she said. Where? He gave her a coffee shop name in Mapo district. 9 p.m. He told her again to come alone. She said she would, and ended the call and stood for a moment with the phone at her side, looking at nothing, the way you look at nothing when you're looking at everything inside. Then she called Min-jae. He picked up on the second ring. Someone just called me, she said. Unknown number. He says he has information about Baekwa and what Ms. Kang is building. He wants to meet tonight, and he told me to come alone. A short silence. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of a man filing information. Where? She gave him the name. He said he'd call her back in 4 minutes. He called back in 3. The number traces to a prepaid, he said. The coffee shop is real. Mapodero, Near the market. A pause that had something careful in it. Near the market where she met Ms. Kang. Amara registered that. Who would know to use that location? Someone who did research, or someone who wanted you to feel something when you arrived. He paused again. Miss Williams, I need to tell Miss Kang. I know, Amara said. That's why I called you. Seojin listened to Min-jae's account of the call without interrupting. She was in her car. She had left the building after the investor meeting and was somewhere in traffic between Gangnam and Yeouido, a route she took sometimes when she needed to think without walls around her. Min-jae had reached her on the car phone and she listened with her eyes on the brake lights in front of her, and her hand flat on her knee. When Min-jae finished, she said, "Describe the voice." Ms. Williams said older, calm, not nervous. His English was good. Native level or close? Korean? She said she couldn't tell. He started in Korean, switched to English. Seojin was quiet for long enough that Min-jae said, "Miss Kang?" "I know who it is," she said. She said it without heat or surprise, the way you say a thing you have been waiting a long time to say out loud. The way a word sits differently in the mouth once you've stopped holding it back. "Who?" Min-jae said. "His name is Lee Chun-soo," she said. "He was my father's operational director before I took the syndicate." She watched the brake lights. "He's been outside the country for 9 years. I assumed he intended to stay that way." "What does he want?" "To remind me of what I am," she said, "and to make sure she knows it before she goes further in." A long beat. "Do I pull her out of the meeting?" Min-jae said. "No," Seojin said. "She goes, and I go with her." He said, "I know what he said." Her voice was flat and final. "He said alone because he doesn't want me there. That's exactly why I'll be there." She told him the address. She told him to have 2 men already inside before 9. She told him she would be there at 8:50, and she did not want Amar to know until they were both in the room. She ended the call. She looked at the traffic, soul dense and red and relentless ahead of her, and she felt something she had not felt in years, which was the specific exposure of having a thing you have protected in darkness brought suddenly into a room with light. Lee Chun-soo had watched her build. He had watched her from a careful distance for 9 years, and he had chosen now, this moment, this week, this woman, to step forward. That was not coincidence. That was a message she understood completely. She had something now that he could take from her. Not money, not power, something she had not had 9 years ago when he left. The coffee shop was the kind of place that had been there for 20 years without updating. Worn wooden tables, a counter that smelled like roasted barley, fluorescent warmth that made everyone look slightly older than they were. At 8:47, it held 4 other customers, none of whom were paying attention to anything except their phones and their drinks, and Amara, who arrived at 8:52 and chose a table near the back wall because she had developed these past weeks a preference for walls behind her. She had not been told Seojin was coming. At 8:58, Seojin walked through the door. Amara saw her and went very still. Seojin crossed the room and sat down across from her and said nothing for a moment, just looked at her with that particular quality of directness that had, over these weeks, stopped feeling like assessment and started feeling like something she did not have a clean word for. "You didn't have to," Amara started. "I know who he is," Seojin said. "And he knows I know he's coming. That changes what this meeting is." "What is it?" "Old business," Seojin said. "That I should have closed a long time ago." She settled her coat on the back of the chair. "I want you here. I want you to hear what he says, all of it." She looked at Amara. "There are things about Baehua's past that I have not told you. I intended to tell you before you made a final decision about the foundation. He's accelerated that conversation." Amara looked at her. "Are you going to tell me now?" "He'll tell you," Seojin said. "And I'll tell you what's true and what's curated. That's the difference between hearing it from him alone and hearing it with me here." The door opened at 9:02. Lee Chun-soo was 70, or close to it, with white hair cut short and a face that had done a lot of weather over a long time and come out the other side of it into a particular kind of settled toughness. He wore a plain dark coat, and he walked with a slight drag on the right side that was old, healed, permanent. He was not what Amara had built from the voice on the phone. She had imagined someone harder, more obviously dangerous. He looked like someone's grandfather until you saw his eyes, which were clear and cold and moved around the room in the first 3 seconds with a thoroughness that had nothing grandfatherly in it. He saw Seo Jin. He stopped in the middle of the coffee shop floor. His face did not change dramatically. A small contraction around the eyes, something that might have been the beginning of a smile, or might have been the opposite. He came to the table and sat. For a moment, the three of them existed in the kind of silence that has specific gravity. Then Lee looked at Amara and said in clear English, "She came." "She comes where she decides," Amara said. He looked at her with something that was not hostile. It was more like evaluation, the clean, undisguised kind. "You're direct," he said. "So are you, apparently. You called me." He looked at Seo Jin. He said in Korean something that Amara waded through. Seo Jin answered in Korean and then turned to Amara and said, "He says he's surprised I didn't have him removed before he sat down. I told him the times are different." Lee looked between them. Then he chose English, which Amara understood was a courtesy to her and a concession she should note. "I'm going to tell you what I know," he said to Amara, "not to destroy what she's building now. What she's building now may be real. I'm telling you because you should know the ground it's built on." "I'm listening," Amara said. He told her. He told her about the Baekwa syndicate as it had existed under her father, so Kang Dae-won, dead 11 years now, a man who had built his empire on protection rackets and loan operations, and a controlled network of influence across 3 districts that had made him one of the most feared and most useful men in Seoul's underworld. He told her about the families that had been pressured out of their businesses in the Mapo district in the early expansion years. He told her about 3 men who had disappeared during a period of territorial dispute, who had never formally been connected to Baekwa, but whose families Lee had looked at for a long time. He told her about the way the syndicate's money had been washed through real estate in the years before the Baekwa holding structure was formalized, not cleanly, not without harm to the people whose property was used as part of the mechanism. He told her all of it in a flat, factual voice, the way a man tells things he has been carrying for a long time and has decided to set down. And then he stopped. Amara looked at Seo Jin. Seo Jin was looking at the table. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she was not moving, and she was not looking away from the table, which told Amara more than any denial would have. "Is he right?" Amara said. Seo Jin looked up. "About the structural history of the syndicate." "Yes." "The people." "The 3 men." She stopped. She started again. "I was 26 when that happened. I was not the decision maker. That is true, and it is also not the same as saying I had no knowledge of the world I was in." She held Amara's gaze. "I have carried that." "Carrying it isn't the same as paying for it," Lee said. He said it without venom, almost gently. "I know that," Seo Jin said. "Then what have you paid?" he said. She looked at him across the worn wooden table, and Amara watched her. Watched the woman who ran the Baekwa syndicate, who had built 30 years of empire, who had sat in the windowless room and offered Junho Park a choice she didn't have to offer. Watched her sit with the question without deflecting it, without dressing it. "Not enough," Seo Jin said. "Not what's owed." Lee was quiet. "Which is why the foundation is not charity," Seo Jin said. "It's not redemption. I don't believe in redemption as a transaction. The families in Mapo who lost their businesses. I've been in contact with 3 of them through intermediaries for the past 4 years, making restitution quietly, without announcement, because announcement would be for me and the money was for them." She paused. "The 3 men. Their families receive financial support beginning 8 years ago, monthly, through a structure that cannot be traced to me and never will be because it was never meant to be known." Another pause. "I'm not telling you this to be absolved. I'm telling you because you asked what I've paid, and that is part of the answer." Lee looked at her for a long time. "Why the secrecy?" he said. if you've changed. Because the families didn't lose their fathers and their husbands so that I could use their loss to build a public image, she said. The money was theirs. Their grief was theirs. My involvement in the restitution is the smallest possible part of what they should have. The coffee shop was quiet around them. Someone at the counter ordered something, and the barista moved, and the sounds of ordinary life continued at their ordinary pace, indifferent to the three people at the back table and the weight of what was moving between them. Lee looked at Amara. Now you know, he said, what she built on, what she's building toward. He spread his hands, a small gesture. I'm not here to make your decision for you. I'm here because I watched too many people go into Baikwa without knowing what they were walking into. And you? He paused, studying her. You are not the kind of person who deserves to walk in blind. Why do you care what I deserve? Amara said. You don't know me. No, he said. But I know what you did at that market. He saw her expression change and he said, I've been watching her for 9 years. I watched this. I saw it when it happened. He looked at Seojin. I watched what it did to her. And I wanted to know what kind of person could do that to her. His voice was dry, not sentimental. A woman who gives $3 she doesn't have to a stranger who turns out to be one of the most dangerous people in Korea. That is either very brave or very foolish, and I wanted to know which. Which is it? Amara said. He considered. Both, he said. Which in my experience is the only combination that actually changes anything. He left at 10:17. He did not say goodbye in the conventional way. He stood, he put on his coat. He looked at Seojin one last time and said something in Korean that Seojin received without expression, and then he walked out of the coffee shop and back into the Seoul night. Amara and Seojin sat alone in the quiet. The barista was wiping the counter. One of the other customers had left. The fluorescent warmth of the place settled around them. Amara said, The foundation, what you told me about, building something at scale with permanence. She looked at her hands on the table. You meant it. Yes. Even knowing what it's built on. Especially knowing that, Seojin said, because I know it, and because knowing it is not the same as being stopped by it. She looked at Amara. You asked me once, not in words, but the question was there, what kind of woman I am. I don't have a clean answer. I have the history Lee described, and I have the choices I've made since, and I have what I'm building now, and all of it is true simultaneously, and I'm not asking you to resolve that. I'm not able to resolve it myself. Amara was quiet for a moment. What is the foundation? She said. Specifically, what do you want to build? Seojin told her. She told her about the Baekwa Global Foundation she had been structuring for 3 years. Not a charitable arm, not a PR mechanism, but a fully independent entity funded by a portion of Baekwa Holdings' legitimate profits, governed by an external board, focused on long-term community infrastructure across immigrant and low-income districts in Seoul and eventually beyond. She told her about the partners she had been in quiet conversation with, municipal liaisons, international development organizations, 3 universities with community research programs. She told her about the scope, housing stabilization, education access, medical support for families like Amara's mother's family, like the families in the Namsan districts they had just secured funding to serve. She told her that she wanted Amara to lead it, not as a project associate, not as a development track participant, as the head of the foundation, its first director, the person who would build it from the structure Seojin had designed into something that could outlast both of them. Amara sat with that. Why me? She said. Not modesty. A genuine question. Because you are not from this world, Seojin said. You have no debt to it, no history in it. You walked into it because I asked you to, and in 3 weeks you found the fracture in a data model that 8 months of professional work had missed. And you stood in a room full of people who had decided about you before you opened your mouth and you held. She paused. And because you said it to me at the door, about Junho, that his 15 years mattered. Her voice was steady, and something underneath it was not. I had not thought about it that way. In 30 years, I had not thought about it that way. and you said it in 2 sentences and walked out. Amara looked at her. I need someone who thinks that way, Seojin said, who sees the person inside the thing they've done. I spent 30 years not doing that, and I built something powerful, and I built something that cost people who didn't deserve the cost. I don't want to keep building that way. She stopped. I want to build the other thing, and I need someone who already knows how. The coffee shop was nearly empty now. The barista had begun stacking chairs at the tables near the window. Outside on Mapodairo, the night traffic moved slow and steady. The street wet from an earlier rain, the lights of the city stretched in long reflections on the pavement. Amara thought about her mother, the medication schedule, the photo on the wall, her mother in a hospital bed smiling for someone else's sake. She thought about her brother's essay, the photo sent at midnight. Is this okay? She thought about standing at a checkout counter in this neighborhood 6 weeks ago with cooking oil and instant ramen in her basket and $3 in her purse, and a cashier humiliating someone who turned out to be the most powerful criminal boss in Korea, and the thing inside her that had moved without permission, the thing that simply said, this is wrong, and you can fix it, and acted. She had not thought about it as courage. She had not thought about it as anything. She had just done it. She looked at Seojin. I have conditions, she said. Seojin's eyes changed slightly, something that might have been relief or its older sibling. Tell me. The foundation is genuinely independent, Amara said. External board, transparent financials, public reporting, no operational connection to the syndicate side, not in personnel, not in funding structure, not in anything I can trace. Agreed. The community liaison work for Namsan becomes the model. We go into the districts, we ask. We don't assume we know what people need. Agreed. And Junho Park. She watched Seojin's face. Whatever he's building now, if there's a way to use the foundation's network to support legitimate work he's doing, not absolution, not a favor, just the same access anyone else would have. Seojin was quiet for a moment. That's not a small ask. I know. He tried to destroy you. He was broken before I got there, Amara said. I'm not saying what he did is acceptable. I'm saying the foundation doesn't exist to punish people. If it does, it's just another kind of power, and you have enough of that already. The silence between them was long. Outside, a truck moved past on the wet street, and the sound of it came through the glass and faded. All right, Seojin said. Amara nodded once. Then yes, she said. I'll lead it. What came after did not come easily or quickly. Nothing worth building does. The Baekwa Global Foundation was formally registered 4 months later with an external board of 7 people, none of them from the syndicate structure, and Amara Williams listed as founding director. The announcement was quiet. No press conference, no launch event. A single statement on the foundation's new website with the mission laid out in plain language and a contact address for community organizations to reach out directly. The Namsan Urban Renewal Project broke ground in the spring. Amara was there in work boots, standing on muddy earth that would become housing and a community health clinic and an adult education center, talking to a man named Mr. O, who had run a small restaurant in this district for 30 years and had watched the neighborhood hollow out around him, and who had stopped her mid-sentence to ask, "Why does someone like you care about this place?" She had thought about how to answer that. "Because someone asked me to show up," she said, "and I found out I was good at it." He had looked at her for a moment. Then he had said, "Come have lunch. I'll show you what this neighborhood used to be. Maybe some of that comes back." She went. She sat in his restaurant and ate and listened for 2 hours, and she took notes, and some of what he told her ended up in the Foundation's first annual community report, attributed with his permission, which he gave after reading the draft and saying, "Yes, that's right, that's what happened." Yuna joined the Foundation's research division 8 months after it launched, transferring from Baekwa Holdings with the kind of efficiency that characterized everything she did. No ceremony, no announcement, an email to Amara on a Tuesday morning that said, "I'd like to work on the district data program. Let me know if there's a place." There was a place. There was always a place for someone who showed up and did the work without needing to be applauded for it. Junho Park did not disappear. He spent 3 months doing very little by his own later accounting, sitting in his apartment in Gangnam, going through the particular disintegration that happens when the structure a person has organized their entire identity around is suddenly gone, feeling the strange lightness and terror of a man without a fixed point. His wife, whose name was Ji Young, and who had more patience than he had ever adequately understood, sat with him through most of it without pushing. In the 4th month, he took a consulting position with a small urban development nonprofit in Incheon. Not prestigious, not well compensated, the kind of work he would have considered beneath him 18 months earlier. He was good at it. He had always been good at the actual work. The nonprofit's director told him in the first week that his instincts on project structure were the best she'd seen from a consultant at any level. And he had gone home that evening and sat with Ji Young and told her what the director had said, and Ji Young had looked at him and said, "I know. I've always known." He received a letter from the Baekwa Global Foundation in the 6th month. It was not from Seo Jin. It was from Amara Williams on Foundation letterhead, informing him that the Foundation's Community Development Network was open to partnership applications from qualifying nonprofits, and that the Incheon organization he was working with appeared to meet the criteria. It included application materials and a direct contact address. He read it 3 times. He set it on the kitchen table, and Ji Young read it over his shoulder and did not say anything for a moment. "Are you going to apply?" she said. He looked at the letter. "Yes," he said. They were approved 4 months later. The partnership was not large, a data sharing agreement and a referral network for displaced families. But it was real, and it worked, and at the first joint meeting between the Foundation's team and the Incheon nonprofit, Amara Williams sat across a conference table from Junho Park for the first time since the night the server logs came back. They shook hands. Neither of them said anything about what had passed between them. There was nothing to say that the handshake didn't already say better. He looked older, which she had expected. He looked less armored, which she had not. He looked like a man who had survived something and was still deciding what to do with the surviving. She understood that. After the meeting, in the hallway, he stopped her, just for a moment. "The letter," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "Why did you?" She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about everything. "Because the Foundation isn't for people who already have what they need," she said. "If it was, we wouldn't need it." He looked at her. Something moved through his face that had no clean name. He nodded and walked to the elevator. She watched him go. She thought about 15 years. She thought about the choices people make when they feel invisible, when they have given everything to a structure that does not see them, when the thing they built their identity on is handed to a stranger. She thought about how easy it is to become the thing you are most afraid of being diminished, of being unseen, of having your work mean nothing, and how the fear, if you feed it long enough in darkness, turns into exactly the thing that diminishes you. She didn't excuse what he had done. She understood it. Those were not the same. But on the first anniversary of the day she had bought the bread, Amara was in her office on the 3rd floor of the Foundation's Mapo District building, a repurposed commercial space 2 blocks from the market, when Min Jae appeared in the doorway. He said Seo Jin would like to see her. Not upstairs, not the tower in Gangnam. Here. Seo Jin came herself, which she had done several times over this year, appearing in the Foundation's building without announcement the way she had appeared in the market, disguised by ordinariness, moving through the world when she needed to remember what it looked like from the ground. She sat across from Amara in her plain coat. She set a small box on the desk between them. Amara looked at it. It was the size of something that had been saved carefully for a long time. "Open it," Seo Jin said. Inside, under a layer of tissue, was a small frame. Inside the frame, preserved behind glass, was a folded piece of paper. Not quite a bill, a carefully preserved assembly of worn paper and a few coins pressed flat. $3. Or the Korean equivalent. 2 crumpled notes and 3 coins, exactly as they had been on the counter of the market 1 year ago. Amara looked at it for a long time. She looked at Seo Jin. "I thought you bought bread," she said. Seojin's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile and was more than one. You thought you bought bread, she said. You bought something else entirely. Amara set the frame down carefully on the desk in front of her. She looked at the preserved $3, the worn notes, the small coins, and she thought about the woman who had stood at a checkout counter and felt invisible, and the woman who had stepped forward because she couldn't not, and the distance between that moment and this room, this building, this year. She thought about what it costs to be seen, to be the one who sees, to step into the gap between a person and their humiliation with the last thing you have and say, this is not how it ends. You told me, Amara said, that I thought I bought bread, but you bought my faith in humanity. She looked at Seojin. That's what you said. I remember, Seojin said. You were wrong, Amara said, not unkindly, directly, the way she said all true things. I didn't buy anything back. You still had it. You just buried it somewhere you couldn't reach. She looked at the frame. I just pointed at where it was. The room was quiet. Outside on Mapodairo, the afternoon traffic moved in its rhythms, the street sounds coming through the window. A delivery scooter, someone calling out, a child's voice from the direction of the market. The ordinary city, persistent and indifferent, and full of people who were, at any given moment, deciding whether or not to step forward. Seojin looked at the frame on the desk. She looked at Amara. Something in her face, in the particular set of it, in the place around her eyes where 30 years of controlled expression had carved its lines, shifted into something that had not been there 1 year ago. Not softness exactly, something with more structure than softness, something built. Keep it, she said, the frame. It belongs to you, Amara said. It belongs, Seojin said, to whoever needs to remember that it happened. She stood, which was how Seojin ended conversations, standing, leaving, the words complete behind her. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She looked at Amara one final time. The Foundation's first annual report goes public next week. I read the draft last night. And? Amara said. It's the best thing with our name on it, Seojin said. In 30 years, it is the best thing with our name on it. She left. Her footsteps down the hallway, the sound of the stairwell door, then silence. Amara sat alone in her office with the $3 in their frame on the desk in front of her, and the city breathing outside the window, and the year's full weight distributed through her body. The exhaustion, the gratitude, the grief for the version of herself that had stood in this neighborhood 12 months ago with nothing left to give and had given it anyway. And she stayed with all of it the way you stay with things that have made you, without rushing to resolve them, without asking them to be less than what they are. After a while, she picked up her phone. She called her mother. 3 rings, then her mother's voice, warm and familiar, and a little breathless the way it always was when she saw Amara's name on the screen. Like answering was itself a small joy she hadn't talked herself out of yet. Baby, her mother said. Hi, Mom, Amara said. I just wanted to call. I don't have news. I just wanted to hear your voice. Her mother laughed a little. That's the best reason there is, she said. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing particular. Her brother's semester, a recipe her mother had been trying, the physical therapist who told bad jokes during sessions and her mother found unaccountably charming. Ordinary conversation, the kind that has no weight in the moment and accumulates into everything over a lifetime. When they said goodnight, Amara set the phone down and sat in the quiet office as the light outside shifted toward evening, the city settling into its nighttime rhythms, and she looked at the frame on her desk. The $3, the coins, the worn notes preserved behind glass. She had been a janitor with tired eyes and an empty wallet and a reflex toward other people's pain that she had never managed to suppress. And she had stepped forward in a grocery store because someone was being treated like they were worthless, and she had something to give. She still had it. That was the thing that had not changed, through everything. The meetings and the sabotage and the server logs and the windowless room and the investor presentation and Lee Chun-soo across a worn table telling her the true history of the ground she was standing on. The thing inside her that moved toward rather than away. It had not been shaped by this world, and it had not been broken by it, and the only thing she had ever been asked to do with it, the only thing that had ever mattered, was keep it intact. She stood. She put on her coat. She turned off the desk lamp. On her way out, she passed the community board in the foundation's front hall. Photos and updates from the Namsan district, a message from Mr. O, a flyer for the new adult education enrollment, a hand-drawn card from a family that had moved into one of the first completed housing units, a child's writing on the front. "Thank you for our home." She stopped at the card. She looked at it for a moment. Then she pushed through the door into the Mapo evening, the wet street, the market lights down the block, the city enormous and indifferent and full of people deciding, in this moment and the next and the one after that, whether to step forward or away. She walked toward the market. She walked like someone who had somewhere to be,